Hey coaches, ready for a deep dive into something that's been getting a lot of attention in track and field, online abuse.
Yeah, it's been hard to miss.
It really has, and we're going beyond just, a few bad comments here and there. We're looking at a huge 4-year study from World Athletics and Threat Matrix. They studied online abuse aimed at athletes during 4 major events, starting with the Tokyo Olympics, then the World Championships in Oregon, then Budapest, and ending with, well, the Paris Olympics that just finished.
So they've got data covering a good chunk of time then.
That's right. And they didn't just focus on one platform either. They looked at abuse across all the big social media sites. But it gives us this incredible long-term view of online abuse. We can see how it's changing over time, which is unfortunately not a very positive trend.
I can imagine. What's standing out so far?
Well, one of the biggest things is just how persistent the targeting is. The same athletes are getting hit again and again across multiple events.
So it's not just random.
Not at all. For example, 3 of the top 5 athletes who received the most abuse in Budapest, guess what?
They're in the top 5 in Paris, too.
Bingo. It's targeted and relentless.
That's awful. And we're talking about millions of posts and comments, right? Is the abuse spread out or...
Actually, that's the other crazy thing. It's super concentrated. Back in Tokyo, just 2 athletes got a whopping 65% of all the abuse they found.
Wow.
And by the time we get to Paris, it's even worse. 2 athletes are getting 84% of the abuse.
So most of the negativity is aimed at a tiny fraction of athletes. That's wild.
And it gets worse. Throughout the entire study, 2 major themes kept popping up: racism and sexism.
Ugh, I was afraid you were going to say that.
Yeah, it's tough to hear. But racism was consistently in the top 2 categories of abuse at every single event.
Meaning it's the most common type of abuse they saw.
Exactly. And sexism was a big problem throughout the whole study, too.
Affecting both men and women, I imagine.
Sadly, yes. Although the study did note that for men, sexist abuse often targeted their female family members. It shows how these different types of abuse often overlap and attack athletes from multiple angles.
And you said it gets worse.
Yeah, there was also a really scary increase in sexual abuse online.
Oh, man.
And sadly, this seems to be a growing trend. Plus, how it shows up is different for men and women.
How so?
For men, sexual language is often used as an insult. But for women, it's more likely to involve threats of sexual violence and just terrible language.
That's a really important difference, and it highlights how we as coaches need to be sensitive to the various ways that abuse can affect athletes.
You're right. The emotional toll of online abuse can be huge. Coaches and support staff need to be understanding and ready to act.
Agreed. So where's all this abuse happening? Is it mostly on X, like it used to be?
Yeah, it's not surprising, but X, what used to be Twitter, is still the main platform for abuse during live events. I guess that's because it's so real time, and also because the researchers had access to all the data.
Right, makes sense. But are athletes using other platforms too?
Absolutely. They're increasingly on Instagram, Facebook, even TikTok.
So it's not just an X problem anymore. What about, I don't know, are there any new tactics abusers are using?
Oh, yeah. Something that really jumped out at me was the huge increase in emojis being used in abusive content. Get this, it went up by 361% between Budapest and Paris.
361%. That's insane.
It is, and it seems like people are using emojis to try to get around those platform guidelines.
You mean like a secret code for hate?
Exactly.
Can you give some examples of how they're doing that?
Sure. Emojis like the rat, snake, or pig are often used to show negative feelings about athletes. Monkey and gorilla emojis, well, they're being used for racist imagery. And then you've got emojis like the corn or eggplant, which are being used to symbolize pornographic content.
Wow, that's disturbing. It really shows that online abuse comes in many forms. We have to be aware of how even something as simple as an emoji can be weaponized.
Couldn't agree more. It underlines how important it is to keep educating ourselves and athletes about online safety, because things are constantly changing.
Definitely. So is there any difference in who's getting targeted, like men versus women?
It's interesting. The report initially found that female athletes were targeted more. But that seems to be shifting.
Shifting how?
By the time of the Paris Olympics, abuse towards male athletes actually surpassed abuse towards female athletes by a little bit.
So it's not a women's issue anymore. It affects all athletes.
It really does.
Yeah.
This whole thing has been really eye-opening.
Okay, so we've uncovered some pretty disturbing stuff about online abuse in track and field. But the report doesn't just point out problems, right?
You're right. It also sheds light on what's being done to fight back.
For starters, Every single abusive post they found was reported to the social media platform where it was posted.
So they were actually trying to get this stuff taken down, not just collecting data.
Absolutely. And it went further than that. 254 accounts were escalated to the platforms for more serious action, like potential suspension or even permanent bans.
That's good to hear.
Yeah.
What about those really serious cases? Do they do anything beyond just reporting them to the platforms?
Yes, actually. 2 cases were so bad that they were referred to law enforcement.
Wow. That's a
Yeah.
serious reminder that this isn't just about words on a screen. It can have real-world consequences.
It really can, and it's so important to remember that online abuse can have a devastating impact on athletes' mental health.
Absolutely. So what's World Athletics doing to actually protect athletes? I know the report mentioned something about AI protection.
They've been offering year-round AI protection to some of the athletes who were targeted the most.
And what does that mean? What is AI protection?
Basically, it uses artificial intelligence to monitor social media for abusive content and flag it for removal automatically. It adds an extra layer of protection for athletes who are especially vulnerable.
So it's like a digital bodyguard. And the report also talked about World Athletics creating educational materials for athletes on online safety.
Right, which is so important. Giving athletes the knowledge and skills to protect themselves online is a key part of the solution.
Absolutely. So we've talked about what World Athletics is doing, but what does all of this mean for coaches? What's our role in all of this?
To me, the big takeaway for coaches is that online abuse is a huge problem that affects athletes at every level. We can't just ignore it.
So we need to be proactive,
Yeah.
not just react when something happens. But what can we actually do? It seems like such a big problem.
Well, the first thing is education. Read this report, stay updated on the trends in online abuse, and know what resources are available to athletes.
So do your homework, basically.
Exactly. And then talk to your athletes, have open and honest conversations with them about online safety. Let them know that you're there for them if they're experiencing abuse.
Create a safe space for them to speak up.
Yes. And finally, be an advocate. Encourage your athletes to report abuse, support them if they do, and push for better protections from social media platforms and governing bodies.
So it's a three-pronged approach: education, communication, and action.
That's it. We can't just sit back and let this continue. We have to step up and protect our athletes.
Well said. You know, some coaches might be listening to this and thinking, okay, but what can I really do? I'm just one person. What would you say to them?
I get that. It can feel overwhelming. But even small actions can make a difference.
Like what?
Well, something as simple as having a team meeting to talk about online safety, for instance, or creating a team culture where everyone feels respected and supported, both on and off the track.
So it's about setting the tone and leading by example.
Exactly. And remember, you don't have to be a tech expert or social media guru to offer support. Sometimes just listening to an athlete and validating their experience can make a huge difference.
That's a great point. It's easy to feel helpless when faced with something like this, but there are things coaches can do to support their athletes.
Absolutely. And if coaches, athletes, governing bodies, and social media platforms all work together, we can create a safer and more positive online environment for everyone.
Couldn't agree more. Thanks so much for sharing your expertise and helping coaches understand this complex issue and, what we can do to support our athletes.
My pleasure. And remember, coaches, this conversation needs to continue, both within track and field and in every other sport.
Well said. To all our track and field coaches listening, we hope this deep dive has given you some insights and some practical tools to help your athletes navigate this challenging online world. Remember, you're not alone in this fight. There are resources out there, and together, we can create a safer, more supportive environment for everyone in track and field.